Get out of my office and never come back. Director Blake Morrison's words sliced through the marble lobby of Paramount Towers like a executioner's blade. Naomi Pierce stood frozen, her cardboard box of personal belongings trembling in her hands as security guards moved toward her. The 34-year-old senior architect who had just designed the city's most innovative sustainability project was being escorted out like a criminal. Behind her, the floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Manhattan skyline, building she had helped shape, now standing as silent witnesses to her humiliation. 60 employees whispered and stared, their phones already capturing the moment for company gossip threads. Blake stood beside the reception desk, his three-piece Armani suit pristine, his expression carved from ice. His corner office plaques glittered behind him, MBA from Wharton, Executive of the Year, Visionary Leader Awards that suddenly felt hollow. But instead of leaving quietly, Naomi turned back one last time. Her hazel eyes swept across the architectural renderings on the walls, designs that bore her fingerprints, innovations Blake had claimed as his own. "Director Morrison?" she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. The entire lobby fell silent. "You're making a mistake, and one day you'll realize it, but by then it will be too late." The room erupted in shocked gasps. Cameras zoomed closer, capturing every detail. Blake, who had always believed he controlled everything, suddenly felt the ground shift beneath his feet. What happens when the person you destroy becomes the one thing you desperately need? If you enjoy stories of justice, karma, and powerful comebacks, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. And ask yourself, how will Blake react when the woman he threw away becomes his only hope? Let's find out what happens next.
The humiliation echoed through Naomi's mind like a death sentence, repeating on an endless loop. Within hours, the news spread across the architecture community like wildfire. The rising star of sustainable design had been fired. Elite firms whispered her name in hushed tones, wondering what scandal could topple someone so talented so quickly. In Blake Morrison's world, the penthouse office overlooking Central Park, where leather chairs cost more than most people's cars, where morning meetings involved imported espresso and discussions about million-dollar contracts, he was the embodiment of corporate success. His degrees from Wharton and MIT mounted on walls like trophies. His connections reached into city government, real estate empires, and the highest levels of urban planning. At charity galas, he clinked champagne glasses with senators and billionaires. Blake lived in a world where power was currency and loyalty meant nothing compared to profit margins. On the other side of that gleaming tower, Naomi Pierce began the longest night of her life. She sat on a park bench in Bryant Park, her cardboard box beside her as the sun dipped below the skyline. Inside the box were the remnants of her career: a framed architecture degree, notebooks filled with sketches, a coffee mug that said "World's Best Designer." Her phone buzzed constantly at first. Colleagues expressing shock, former mentors asking what happened. Then the calls stopped one by one, as fear of association spread through the industry like a contagion. Naomi had no family. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19. She built her entire life around her career, pouring every ounce of energy into becoming the architect she'd dreamed of being since childhood. Now she sat alone on a bench with $73 in her bank account and nowhere to go. The hierarchy in the corporate world was brutal and absolute. Executives lived in penthouses. Mid-level managers fought for corner offices. And the talented ones who actually created the work were disposable. To Blake, that hierarchy was the natural order. Success, he believed, came from connections, elite schools, and knowing how to play the game. He dated Sloan Patterson, a corporate lawyer from a family of old money, as proof that he belonged at the top. When he saw junior staff in the hallways, he barely acknowledged them. They were tools, not people. In Blake's eyes, true vision required an MBA and a network, not raw talent or genuine innovation. And yet, even as he celebrated his latest promotion, as the media praised his visionary leadership, the first cracks had already begun to form in his perfect facade. He didn't yet know that the woman sleeping on a park bench was about to shatter everything he believed about power, success, and control. Naomi Pierce had not always been the woman clutching a cardboard box on a park bench. 7 years ago, she had been a promising graduate from MIT's School of Architecture. Her thesis on sustainable urban design had earned her a standing ovation and offers from firms across the country. Professors called her a once-in-a-generation talent, someone who could reshape how cities approached environmental challenges. Then she met Ryan Gallagher at a gallery opening in Brooklyn. He was charming, passionate, an artist who painted murals across the city, bringing color to forgotten neighborhoods. Naomi fell hard and fast. They moved in together within months, talking about futures and dreams over wine on their fire escape. She took a job at Paramount Towers, not because it was her dream firm, but because it paid well. Ryan's art wasn't selling and someone had to cover rent. She told herself it was temporary, just until his career took off, just until they built something stable together. But Ryan's career never took off. Instead, his drinking did. The rejection letters from galleries piled up, replaced by empty bottles hidden in closets. Arguments erupted over money, over his refusal to get a regular job, over the growing distance between who they'd been and who they were becoming. Naomi worked 60, 70-hour weeks, designing projects that Blake would present as his own. She swallowed her pride, told herself it was part of paying dues, building a reputation. Then one morning she came home early from a site visit and found Ryan in bed with someone else, a model from one of his art classes, tangled in sheets Naomi had washed the day before. "I can't do this anymore," he said as she stood frozen in the doorway. "You're never here anyway. You care more about buildings than about us." The apartment was in his name, the lease signed before she moved in. Within a week, Naomi was gone, carrying 2 suitcases and a broken heart. She threw herself into work even harder, using architecture as an escape from the pain. She created the Sterling Eco Complex, a revolutionary mixed-use building that integrated solar panels, green roofs, rainwater harvesting, and carbon-neutral materials. It was her masterpiece, the project that would define her career. But Blake Morrison saw it differently. He saw an opportunity. When the design won the Governor's Award for Sustainable Innovation, Blake stood on stage, accepting the trophy. He thanked his team in vague terms, never mentioning Naomi's name. He gave interviews to Architectural Digest and the New York Times, describing his vision without crediting the woman who had conceived every detail. Naomi stayed quiet at first, telling herself that recognition would come eventually, that good work spoke for itself. But when the city council announced a $50 million urban renewal project, the contract of a lifetime, Blake submitted Naomi's designs under his name alone. And when Naomi confronted him in his office with blueprints and emails proving her authorship, Blake smiled coldly and said, "You're an employee. Everything you create belongs to the firm." Then he fired her for insubordination. That was 3 months ago. Now, Naomi Pierce, age 34, former MIT graduate, former rising star, slept under bridges. She washed in public restrooms, wore the same clothes for days, and stood in food bank lines. Her phone had been disconnected. Her apartment was long gone. Her savings evaporated. Every firm she contacted had been warned off by Blake's network. Her name was poison in the industry, blacklisted without trial. She carried her portfolio in a plastic bag, protecting the sketches and renderings like sacred texts, because no matter how much life had stolen from her, it couldn't steal her talent. Architecture ran in Naomi's blood. It wasn't something she chose. It was something she was. And tonight, as she found shelter in an abandoned construction site, the same site where one of her old designs was being built, Naomi couldn't stop her eyes from drifting to the scaffolding, couldn't help noticing the structural flaws in the foundation, couldn't stop herself from sketching corrections on scraps of newspaper. Because to Naomi, architecture was always the truth, even when that truth no longer had a place for her in the world she'd once belonged to.
The whispers about Naomi's firing had died down, replaced by new scandals and corporate dramas. But what kept Blake Morrison awake at night wasn't guilt. It was the Riverside Project. The $50 million contract he'd won using Naomi's designs was falling apart. The construction had begun 6 months ago with great fanfare, ribbon cuttings, and press coverage, celebrating Blake as the visionary behind the city's future. But now, the foundation was cracking. Structural engineers were filing reports about instability. The environmental systems weren't integrating properly. Solar panels failing, rainwater collection backing up. Inspectors were threatening to shut down the entire site. Blake stood in an emergency meeting with the development board, his confidence crumbling like the building's foundation. "We're 3 months behind schedule," the lead contractor said, tossing photos of cracked concrete onto the conference table. "The green roof is leaking. The load-bearing walls aren't supporting the weight properly. Director Morrison, someone made serious miscalculations in the core design." Blake felt ice water pour through his veins. He had presented Naomi's plans as his own, but he had never actually understood the mathematics behind them, the engineering principles that made the whole system work. He changed details to make the design more cost-effective, eliminating supports he thought were redundant. Now those decisions were destroying the entire project. "The board is considering pulling funding," one of the investors said bluntly. "If this building fails, it's your career, Morrison." That night, Blake sat alone in his penthouse office, the city glittering below him like a constellation of judgment. He had Naomi's original plans, but they were incomplete, missing the detailed calculations and integration notes she'd kept in her private files. Files that were now gone, disappeared with the woman he'd destroyed. His phone rang. Sloane Patterson, his girlfriend, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Blake, the investors are panicking. My firm is getting calls about liability. You need to fix this now or we're both going down." He hung up and made a decision. He would find Naomi Pierce. Not to apologize, not to make amends, but to force her to fix the disaster he'd created using her genius. After all, she was homeless, desperate. She would have no choice but to help him. Blake hired a private investigator. Within 2 days, he had a location. Naomi Pierce was living in a tent city under the Manhattan Bridge, surviving on food donations and working odd jobs for cash. Blake arrived at the encampment in his Mercedes, stepping carefully over trash and sleeping bags. The contrast was almost grotesque, his $1,000 shoes touching ground where people struggled to survive. He found Naomi sitting outside a tattered tent, sketching building designs on cardboard with a pencil stub. For a moment, Blake didn't recognize her. Her hair was shorter, rougher, her face thinner, her clothes worn and stained. But her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, were exactly as he remembered. "Naomi," he said, his voice attempting warmth. She looked up, and her expression went cold as winter steel. "What do you want, Blake?" He crouched down, trying to appear humble. "I need your help. The Riverside project. It's failing. The foundation, the systems, everything. You designed it. It's falling apart." Naomi set down her pencil very slowly. "And you came here because you're the only one who understands the integration, the calculations." He paused. "I'll pay you $50,000 to consult. Fix the structural problems." Naomi laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You stole my designs, took credit for my work, destroyed my career, and now you want me to save you?" "Yes," Blake said, dropping the pretense. "Because if the project fails, I lose everything. And you," he added with calculated cruelty, "you'll stay under this bridge forever. This is your chance to get back into the industry, to prove you still have value." Naomi stared at him for a long moment, then she smiled, a smile that made Blake deeply uncomfortable. "No," she said simply, "I'm not interested in saving your career." Blake stood, anger flashing. "You're making a mistake, Naomi. You're homeless. You have nothing. Without me, you'll die out here." Naomi picked up her pencil and returned to her sketching, her voice calm as stone. "Then I'll die with my integrity intact. Now get out of my sight." Blake left the tent city, rage and desperation mixing into something toxic. But as he drove away, one thought kept circling his mind. What happens when the person you destroyed is the only one who can save you? And what happens when they refuse? The clock was ticking, the building was failing, and Blake Morrison was running out of time. Meanwhile, under the bridge, Naomi continued sketching. Not for Blake, not for fame, but for architecture was her truth. And truth, she had learned, was the only thing that couldn't be stolen.
The Riverside project's collapse made headlines faster than Blake could control. City inspectors halt major development project due to safety concerns. Investors demand answers as $50 million building faces demolition. The board called another emergency meeting, this time with lawyers present. Blake sat at the head of the table, his confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. "We've consulted with 3 structural engineering firms," the board chairman said. "None of them can solve the integration problems without completely starting over. That means we lose $20 million already spent and face lawsuits from every investor and contractor involved." One board member leaned forward. "Director Morrison, you presented this design as your own. The patents, the awards, the contracts, all have your name. Did you actually create this project?" Blake felt the walls closing in. "I had a team," he said carefully. "It was a collaborative effort." "Then bring in your team," the chairman snapped. "We need solutions now." But Blake had no team. There was only Naomi, and she had refused him. That night, Sloan confronted him in his apartment, her designer heels clicking against marble floors. "I talked to my partners at the firm," she said, her voice ice cold. "They're preparing for litigation, Blake. If this building fails, you're personally liable, and I am not going down with you." She set her engagement ring on the kitchen counter. "We're done. I can't be associated with this disaster." Blake watched her leave, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the empty penthouse. Everything he'd built, his reputation, his relationships, his entire identity, was crumbling. The next morning, Blake returned to the tent city under the bridge. This time, he came alone. No driver, no security, just a desperate man with nowhere else to turn. Naomi was washing clothes in a plastic bucket when he arrived. She didn't look up as he approached. "I'll give you everything," Blake said, his voice raw. $100,000. Credit for the design, a public apology. I'll tell the world you created it." Naomi continued scrubbing a shirt in the soapy water. "Not interested." $200,000, Blake said. "A written contract stating you own the intellectual property. You can rebuild your career with that." Naomi finally looked at him, her eyes seeing through every layer of his desperation. "You still don't understand, do you?" she said softly. "This isn't about money, Blake. You didn't just steal my work. You taught the entire industry that talent doesn't matter, that people like me are disposable, that power is the only thing worth having." She stood up, water dripping from her hands. "I'd rather live under this bridge with my integrity than help you profit from my genius one more time." Blake felt something crack inside him. Not anger this time, but something closer to recognition. "Please," he whispered, the word foreign on his tongue. "I'm begging you. I'll lose everything." Naomi picked up her bucket and turned away. "Good," she said. "Then maybe you'll finally understand what you did to me." As Blake walked back to his car, he passed other people living in the tent city. A former teacher who lost everything in a medical bankruptcy. A veteran struggling with PTSD and unemployment. A single mother working 3 jobs but still unable to afford rent. For the first time in his life, Blake Morrison saw them, really saw them. And he realized with devastating clarity that he had become the system that crushed people like Naomi. That his success had been built on the backs of talent he'd exploited and discarded. The question was no longer whether he would lose everything. The question was whether losing everything would finally teach him what truly mattered. Back under the bridge, Naomi continued her sketches, not for Blake, not for any firm, but for the people around her. A community center with affordable housing, solar power, and green spaces. A building that would serve those the system had forgotten, because even in poverty, even in loss, Naomi Pierce was still an architect. And architecture, she believed, should serve humanity, not egos. The collision between Blake's desperation and Naomi's resolution was far from over, but something had shifted in the foundation of both their lives. And sometimes the most important structures
are the ones we build inside ourselves.
3 days later, the city issued a stop work order on the Riverside project. Structural engineers confirmed that the building's foundation was unstable, potentially catastrophic. The board voted unanimously to hold Blake personally responsible for the losses. His assets were frozen, pending investigation, his office was emptied, his name removed from company materials. Blake Morrison was no longer a director. He was a liability. The media descended like vultures. Visionary architect or fraud? Investigative journalists began digging. They found the patent applications, the award submissions, all bearing Blake's name alone. But they also found something else, buried in email servers and contractor testimonies. References to Naomi Pierce, the ghost designer whose work had been systematically erased. A junior architect came forward with evidence, emails where Blake explicitly instructed staff to remove Naomi's name from documents. Within hours, the story exploded. Corporate executives stole designs from homeless architect. The narrative was perfect, a tale of exploitation, karma, and justice. Public opinion turned vicious. Protesters gathered outside Paramount Towers, demanding accountability. The board had no choice. They terminated Blake's employment and filed a lawsuit against him for fraud and misrepresentation. Everything was gone. The penthouse repossessed, the cars seized, the bank accounts frozen. Blake Morrison found himself in a studio apartment in Queens with a futon and a single suitcase. For the first time in his adult life, he understood what it meant to have nothing. Meanwhile, Naomi's name was everywhere. News outlets tracked her down at the tent city, cameras capturing her sketching on cardboard. Architectural firms that had blacklisted her now rushed to offer positions, apologies, public statements of support. MIT announced a scholarship in her name. The governor personally called to apologize for the award ceremony where Blake had accepted credit. But Naomi declined every offer, every opportunity, every attempt to pull her back into the system that had chewed her up. She had seen the truth. The industry that celebrated her now had enabled her destruction then, and she wasn't interested in being anyone's redemption story. Instead, she took the one offer that mattered. A nonprofit organization dedicated to sustainable housing for homeless communities reached out. They had funding, they had land, they had everything except a visionary designer. Naomi accepted immediately, not for money or fame, but because the work mattered. She began designing Haven Heights, a revolutionary housing complex specifically for people experiencing homelessness. Solar-powered, communal kitchens, vertical gardens, job training centers, and affordable micro-apartments. It would be her true masterpiece, architecture that served those who needed it most. 6 months passed. Blake worked as a construction laborer, the only job he could find. He wore a hard hat and carried materials on sites he once would have walked through in expensive suits. The work was brutal. His body ached, his hands blistered. But something unexpected happened. He began to understand construction from the ground up. He saw how decisions made in design meetings affected the people doing the actual work. He learned the names of the crew, their stories, their struggles. Slowly, painfully, Blake Morrison was learning humility. One day he was assigned to a new site, Haven Heights. He arrived early and saw the rendering board, Naomi's design. His breath caught. It was stunning, more elegant and innovative than anything she had created before. And there on the board, in clear letters, lead architect, Naomi Pierce. Blake stood there for a long time, staring at her name, finally in the place it deserved. "Naomi," he called out, his voice rough from disuse. She turned from where she was reviewing plans with contractors. Her expression was neutral, guarded. "Blake, what are you doing here?" "I'm on the crew," he said, gesturing to his work clothes. "I'm laborer number 43. For a moment, neither spoke.
the distance between them measured not in feet, but in the chasm of everything that had happened. "I owe you an apology," Blake said finally. "Not a corporate apology, a real one. I destroyed your career, stole your work, and treated you like you were disposable." Naomi crossed her arms, listening. "I told myself it was just business, that success required playing the game. But the truth is, I was a coward. I took credit for your genius because I knew I could never create anything that brilliant myself. And when you confronted me, I destroyed you because I was terrified of being exposed." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Naomi, truly, deeply sorry. I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I understand now." Naomi studied him, seeing the changes, the weight loss, the calloused hands, the genuine remorse in his eyes. "Apology noted," she said simply. "Now get to work. We have a building to construct." Blake nodded and joined the crew. He worked harder than anyone, carrying materials, mixing concrete, taking orders from foremen who had no idea who he used to be. And slowly, over weeks and months, he earned the respect of the team through sweat and effort. Naomi watched him from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to recognition. She saw a man who had been broken, remade, learning the lesson she had learned the hard way, that true worth comes not from titles or credit, but from the work itself. One evening after the crew had left, Blake approached Naomi as she reviewed the day's progress. "This building," he said quietly, "it's going to change lives." "That's the idea," Naomi replied. He hesitated, then asked, "What made you forgive me?" Naomi looked at him directly. "I haven't forgiven you, Blake, not fully, but I've let go of the anger because holding on to it was only hurting me." She gestured to the half-built structure. "This project is my focus now. These people," she continued, pointing to the foundation, "these families who will live here, they matter more than revenge, more than proving I was right." Blake nodded, understanding for the first time what she'd known all along. "Architecture isn't about ego," he said softly. "It's about service." Naomi almost smiled. "Now you're learning." The construction continued, Haven Heights rising floor by floor. Blake remained on the crew, no longer seeking redemption, but genuinely wanting to be part of something meaningful. The building was completed ahead of schedule, under budget, a triumph of sustainable design. The opening ceremony drew thousands. The mayor gave a speech praising Naomi's vision. Blake stood in the back of the crowd, no longer seeking spotlight, just watching as families moved into homes designed with care and compassion. Naomi spoke at the podium, her voice strong. "This building represents what architecture should be, serving those who need it most. It's not about awards or recognition. It's about creating spaces where people can rebuild their lives with dignity." As the ceremony ended, Blake approached Naomi one final time. "Thank you," he said, "for showing me what really matters." Naomi extended her hand, and they shook, a gesture not of friendship, but of mutual respect. "You did the work, Blake. That's what matters now." He nodded and walked away, not to penthouse offices or corporate success, but to a small apartment, a simple life, and work that actually meant something. 2 years later, Naomi stood before a packed auditorium at MIT. She was receiving an honorary doctorate and delivering the commencement address to the graduating class. Her story had become legend. The architect who lost everything and rebuilt, not just buildings, but her own sense of purpose. "Blake Morrison," she said during her speech, "was my lesson in what not to become. He taught me that success without integrity is just a beautiful facade covering an empty foundation. But he also taught me something else. People can change when they choose to do the work." The audience applauded. Blake, watching the live stream from his apartment, smiled quietly. He now ran a nonprofit teaching construction skills to people experiencing homelessness. It didn't pay much, but it mattered, and that was enough. Naomi continued her speech, looking out at the young faces before her.
How many of you, she asked, have already been told you're not good enough, that you don't have the right connections, the right background, the right credentials? Hands slowly rose across the auditorium, dozens, then hundreds. Naomi's voice strengthened. I'm here to tell you that your worth is not determined by who believes in you. It's determined by the truth of your work, by your integrity, by what you create when no one is watching. Build things that matter, she said. Serve people who need it. Question systems that crush talent. And never, ever let anyone convince you that your genius is disposable. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. After the ceremony, Naomi visited Haven Heights, where families were thriving. Children played in the rooftop gardens. Residents tended vertical farms. Job training programs were launching careers. One resident approached her, tears in her eyes. You gave us more than home, she said. You gave us hope. Naomi hugged her tightly. This is what it's all about. As the sun set over the city, Naomi stood on the roof of Haven Heights, looking at the skyline she had once helped build. She thought about the journey from corporate success to the bridge and back again, about Blake learning humility through hard labor, about the residents rebuilding lives and spaces designed with love. And she realized something profound. She had lost everything: her career, her home, her reputation. But in that loss, she had found her purpose. True architecture, she understood, wasn't about impressing boards or winning awards. It was about creating spaces where human dignity could flourish. Ask yourself today, who have you underestimated because of their circumstances? What genius are you overlooking because it doesn't come in the package you expect? Because maybe the person struggling beside you is exactly the person who will change the world. If this story moved you, share it. If it reminded you that comebacks are possible, leave a comment. And if you've ever been counted out, written off, or thrown away, know this: your story isn't over yet. The best buildings are built from the ground up, and sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. If you enjoy stories like this, stories of resilience, redemption, and the power of human dignity, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We have many more journeys to share, stories that remind us kindness is strength, and that the people society forgets are often the ones who change it. See you in the next video of After Dark Stories, because every ending is just a new beginning waiting to be built.